Welcome to the Developing Life Podcast. Welcome to episode 12 of the Developing Life Podcast. As the urgency of our environment intensifies, how can we as designers step up to the challenge to not only embrace green solutions, but truly embed regenerative strategies to influence positive environmental and social change? Today, we welcome Marc O'Brien, a visionary whose expertise in sustainable and regenerative design extends beyond conventional design wisdom, challenging creatives to disrupt the status quo and think differently about the impact of their work. His holistic view integrates the entire life cycle of products, from creative inception to disposal, underscoring the pivotal role designers play in environmental sustainability. Marc has led workshops, spoken at numerous conferences, and worked at various teams to help cultivate impact-driven solutions, engage the community, and advocate for collective action in climate issues. Joined by our host, Davron Bowman, Marc will share actionable strategies and tools for designers, business owners, and anyone passionate about using creativity to foster a positive impact on our planet and its people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, True. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. If you're here, it's because you are passionate about building a better world using your creative superpowers for good. We're joined today by Marc O'Brien. He has been incredibly busy for the past little bit between leading Project Blue Sky, giving keynote speeches in San Diego, and just leading the way, paving the way for sustainable and regenerative design. Marc, thanks so much for joining us today. This is an OBS conversation, so we really want to cover some actionable insights by the end of this. We're hoping that we have a roadmap that empowers us to integrate sustainable practices immediately. Before we dive in, I would just love to give you a little bit of time to introduce yourself to our audience. Let them know what you have been up to and why you are so passionate about sustainable design.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the invite. So my name is Marc. I live in San Francisco, California. My work has always been under the umbrella of social impact, social design. Going through design school, I realized the power of what design can do, and I wanted to yield that in positive ways. I've been pretty independent my whole career. I've started a lot of my own projects. I've helped launch many other projects. And in 2015 or so, I had what I call a climate epiphany, where I wanted to level up my work and focus on bigger, gnarlier challenges addressing our climate breakdown. And so in 2016, I co-founded a design consultancy firm, and we ran that for about 8 years or so. And then in the middle of that, we, as the organization, as a studio, we launched climatedesigners.org, which is now a global community of designers taking climate action. I can get much more into that if you want. But and now I'm back at being an independent. I'm contracting out with a number of studios and have my own clients. And then I also teach part-time at California College of the Arts. So my work now is focused 100% on climate. If I get approached by anything outside of that, I just politely decline, because this is one of humanity's biggest, gnarliest challenges, and I want to use my skills to address that.
That's incredible. It's incredible to see you taking a route that prioritizes people and the planet over profit, not sacrificing profitability, but being focused on the greater good. I know that one of the key points that you made to me when we first opened up conversation is that no business is going to exist if we don't have a planet. If the Earth is not here, all of the other missions that we're on are kind of irrelevant. So just diving in, let's go ahead and kind of introduce the audience to your way of thinking and kind of clear the board on some misconceptions that exist around sustainable design. Before we jump into the actions that we can take, what are some of the things that we need to be aware of as designers and as creatives that might not be really effective practices, techniques and strategies that might be eating up our time and creativity unnecessarily or leading us down the wrong path?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it might be good to just define a few terms here, just so that there's some context setting. So I have a few notes that I tend to read out when talking about this topic. So first off, what is sustainability? Many definitions exist out there, but one definition that stands out to me is that sustainability is the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. So when I hear that, I'm like, okay, cool, maintain an ecological balance, but I don't know if I look out the window, I want to maintain that, because the work that we're doing now is not. The work that we're doing now is actually harming the planet. We're actually, putting things out there in the world that is causing more damage than at the pace of what we're trying and how we're trying to heal it, right? And so I think that we need to have a clear understanding of what sustainability is. And I think we might want to define what sustainable design is as well. So another definition, again, many out there, sustainable design is a design approach that seeks to minimize negative environmental, social, and economic impacts. So again, minimize negative impacts. Well, why not heal the damage that we've caused? So taking those two definitions in mind, where my mind goes is something around regenerative design. And I might be, kind of moving forward, Davron, with your question here, but I think it's really important to, again, define some of these terms before diving deep. And so what is regeneration? Regeneration, many definitions out there. This is one of them. It's the process of renewal and restoration that makes life and ecosystems resilient to natural fluctuations or events that cause disturbance or damage. So think of it as, it improves upon the previous state. So that sounds a lot better than sustainability, right? Sustainability, at the basic definition of it, just kind of flatlines where things are. Regeneration actually heals and nurtures the damage that we've already done. So in contrast to sustainability, regeneration refers to restoration, renewal, and healing. And so what about regenerative design? Again, many definitions out there. One of them is that it's a design approach that seeks to create systems that are more beneficial to the environment and to human health than they were before they were built. And a lot of that is based on ecological processes, biomimicry, systems thinking, things like that. So I just wanted to kind of set the context there before we dive into this topic. And so going back to your original question, I think first and foremost, not just understanding the definition of these words, but also understanding the problem too. I think one of the first things that designers should do with their desire of wanting to design in a more sustainable way or a more regenerative way is to understand the why and the how we got into this mess. Understand our climate breakdown from a science standpoint. I learned from YouTube University. There's a lot of great documentaries out there. There's a lot of great YouTube channels out there, reading books, articles, podcasts, things like that. And so we have to really understand the problem first before we got here, and we have to understand the problem in terms of how we got here and then approach it through a design mind. I think another thing that we might want to do as well is acknowledge design's role in this, right? Design, let's be honest, we've contributed to our climate breakdown. We have created products using various systems and methodologies that have caused harm to our planet, and so we just need to acknowledge that. Designers create ads that sell stuff that we don't need, made out of finite resources to be used once, twice, 3 times, and then gets discarded or break, so that people have to then buy the next new thing, and then they repeat that same process. So design, in a sense, encourages certain unsustainable lifestyles that put enormous pressure on our planet to begin with. And so just acknowledging stuff first, definitions, our role, things like that, I think that might be the first step in order for designers to take climate action.
I love that. And so to catch everyone up, because I see we've got a lot of people that are joining us, in summary, you're saying that if we just have a focus on sustainability, even if we are to achieve that, then that just kind of creates an endpoint for the damage that we have caused. It's not really doing anything to repair or reverse that. It's just now creating a balanced ecosystem at the point that we achieve sustainability. It's much more important for us to be focused on regenerative design, which in essence is starting to reverse some of that damage. It creates a net positive result in which we're giving more than we're taking as a business or as a creative. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't look at it though as an either or. I think it's a both and. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think we need to approach it with both of these in mind.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I know that the discussion on regenerative business models is kind of just an emerging thing. It's definitely one of those industries that we're excited to see grow, especially with the interconnectivity of AI and it being able to analyze some insights and unlock some innovative methods for us as designers to leverage. Um, when it comes to designing with life cycles in mind, I think that let's start there because that is, as a designer, as a creative, our dream is to see our creativity brought to life, is to see it exist in the real world. And we're taught that, we do market research, we create for the audience, we try to create something that solves problems for them personally, but all of those things are kind of beginning of life cycle and covering the life cycle of a product. There's a huge part that we're omitting, which is the end of life stage. So can you kind of introduce us to the designing with end of life stage in mind? Can you kind of first explain to our audience what that is, and then maybe kind of give us some guidance on how we can consider these things from the start and the benefit that they provide for our clients?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about what we do for a living is that we get paid to be creative. That's awesome. I always just have to remind myself when I get stressed out or when there's like so much work to do, you know, uh, I'm making a living by being creative.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes responsibility. And so anytime you create something, some sort of digital product, physical product, just something, product, service, experience, the moment that you hit publish or send or submit or whatever, it lives in the world. And with that, there comes tremendous impact that, if not thought through thoroughly, can have negative impact on people and the planet. And so if we can come up with the idea, great, but we don't stop there. We have to come up with ways to carry out that idea into reality from start to finish, and then addressing what happens when it's out of our hands. So breaking that down, put some extra thought, whether you're creating something physical or digital, put some extra thought into the things that you're putting out there. So for example, if it's something physical, what materials are you using? Where are they coming from? Who is gathering those materials? How are those materials being shipped? How are you using those materials? Can those materials then be, designed for recycling or biodegradability? Can they be cleaned or repaired to extend the shelf life or the use of that product? Designed for are there take back programs that you're unaware of? And if you do a little bit more research, are there programs that exist already that are trying to use your product in ways that can put a new life on it? But if you're not designing for them in mind, then you're making their lives harder by not designing in ways that will break down your product. Are you designing for, actually, here's another one. Are you using standardized parts? Does your thing have to have its own specific measurements or own specific parts? Can you design something that has standardized parts to be used? So someone maybe at home can repair themselves, right? So I think there's all these different things. And then the digital stuff too, energy consumption. Actually, one thing I want to mention that isn't talked a lot about in this particular topic is things around the end of life in terms of behavior and society and cultural impacts too. Like, as soon as you release something, what's the cultural shift there that could happen, right? What's the thing that's making your product, your service, your experience changing society? Is that in a good way? Is that for the better, or is that maybe going to impact it in a negative way? So I think there's also things in terms of end of life where it's, how is the product or the service or experience that you're creating shaping the world around it, not just in its environmental impact. So I might have went off a little tangent there, but just something I wanted to bring up because it's not really talked about all that much.
Yeah, no, I actually love that, and would love for you to kind of expand on that if possible, because we have so many examples as creatives and designers of like flashy brands, ones that are leveraging innovation and just they're pushing the flare and not really being considerate of materials used, things like that. So what are some brands or entities or organizations? I know that I think during your Project Blue Sky conversation, I think Precious Plastics was brought up. I got to look a little bit into their business model, and it was very innovative. Are there other examples that you can give us of brands that are really taking advantage of thinking through the end of life stage?
I'm always put on the spot with questions like that. I think you have some of the more well-known ones, like Patagonia, for example. I don't know if some of you know a part of their business, but they are actually accepting um, uh, worn or discarded clothing, whether it's their clothing or another brand's clothing, and then they're taking it in and cutting off the parts that actually still are intact and creating new clothing out of it. So you can buy kind of a really cool, unique patchwork kind of shirt or jacket or vest, right? So they're minimizing the amount of material being sent to landfills by cutting off the pieces of the clothing that they can't use anymore, but giving the other part of that clothing a second life.
Well,
I think there's some interesting companies in the food space. There's some interesting companies in the as you mentioned, the plastic space. Mushrooms is a industry that I'm keeping my eye on. Mushrooms, hemp, bamboo, and kelp. Those are my four main guys that I always enjoy researching and learning more about, because those products can actually be created into thousands and thousands of different things, whether it's fabrics, fuels, food, pharmaceuticals, to name a few. And then the natural benefit from just growing them, right? That does wonders, right? A lot of them sequester carbon, a lot of them replenish soil. So there's these newer industries that are being rediscovered, I guess, where people are recognizing the benefits of both, investing in that industry, not just in terms of money, but just actually investing and putting resources and time and energy into creating those resources, and then creating the things that we need to swap out things like plastics and other harmful materials, and then having it where the end of life is something that can be brought back into the system, in that circular system, or that can be used in a different way, maybe a different product, right? So I'm not giving you any specific companies because there's so many out there, but just at the higher level view, though, there's definitely spaces that are incorporating this idea, because businesses, we produce trash, we extract materials. Business is we have caused a lot of harm, businesses, and so are there ways that we can reimagine our supply chain? Are there ways that we can reimagine the materials that we use, and then the end of life, so that we can actually, again, going back to regenerative processes, that we can actually heal the damage that we've caused.
Man, I love that. And so I want to come back to the different methods of sustainability and regenerative business models that we can explore. But first, I want to go back to the point that you mentioned about considering societal impact and kind of what you mean by that. When we're considering how a product is going to go through cultures, how it is going to be broken down at the end, do you mean societal shifts in consistency of use, or making it so that the journey for consumers to repurpose or do something beneficial is easier for them, or what type of societal impact are you saying is most important for us to? Okay.
I think all the above. Yeah. I mean, can we create something that is used for many, many more years than what the original thing was, right? I mean, just look, maybe 100 years ago, companies made products to last.
Yeah.
And companies realized that's not a great business model, because if you buy the one thing, it's going to last for decades. We're not going to have repeat customers. And so this whole idea of planned obsolescence became a thing, and then perceived obsolescence became a thing, where it just made the products, for example, break down, and people would have to buy the next new shiny object. And so can we create things like what we used to, how we used to, so that we shift our spending behavior, So if we only buy the one thing that we need, it always going to last forever. And then, another thing to branch off of that would be, can we come together as a community and can we invest in the one thing that we can then share? So we talk about the sharing economy, right? Do we all need a ladder that we only use for a few minutes and the whole lifespan of that ladder? Or can we all invest in one ladder and then have that be shared amongst our neighborhoods? And then we talk about behavior, right? What new behaviors will be created because of a certain object or a certain service or experience that could be good or that could be bad. I think there's a lot here, and it's I guess what I'm trying to get at is that as much as designers focus on the thing that we're actually designing, we need to pause for a moment and just acknowledge and just think a little bit more about the impact beyond just the environmental footprint of that thing. What are the cultural impacts that this product, service, or experience that we're designing will have? And then how can we modify, change our design decisions to reflect that so that those changes in society and culture are actually beneficial?
Yeah. And so to just expand on that point, can you tell us some of the most popular or I guess maybe some of the lesser known ways that brands or creatives can shift to being sustainable, or what applications there are? I know that in the brief little couple weeks of research that I've put in, seeing brands that are focused on trapping carbon so that it's not released into the atmosphere. You just brought up Patagonia, which normally would evoke more of a nature-based sustainability mission, but now they've leveraged creativity to create like this clothing-based reuse program. So what are ways that we can, I guess, analyze sustainability, or what are the most detrimental negative impacts that we as society are creating that need to be addressed first?
Well, I don't think we brought up the lifecycle analysis process. So that is a pretty standardized thing that any person really can look into when it comes to looking at the thing that they're creating. So it's an approach that emphasizes the environmental impact of a product, service in its entire lifestyle. So we probably need to invest more into that and putting more resources into that. That includes all stages from raw material extraction to processing, transportation, manufacturing, all that stuff, disposal, recycling, things like that. And so I think that needs to be part of the designer's toolkit. And there's plenty of resources out there. Some of them cost money, unfortunately, but there's others that are more kind of high level that are that you can do for relatively cheap or free. I just wanted to make sure that we included that in this as we're talking about end of life and all this other stuff. I'm sorry, I feel like I forgot the other part of that question.
No, that's okay. It was just awareness as to like what is the most detrimental impact that we are creating in the world, and what are the things that need to be addressed when it comes to sustainability, kind of just to help us expand our design thinking. Because yes, as designers and creatives, especially in the digital space, our mindset might start at the digital impact that we're having or how the product is used. But as you said, understanding like the effort involved in raw material extraction and transportation, a lot of businesses are using very inefficient shipping processes or shipping products back and forth, across the world multiple times before they even reach us. So just analyzing things like that. And kind of while we're touching on the topic of design thinking, I know that you are kind of a leader in the strategy of thinking wrong. So we've kind of covered some of the things that we can implement into our design process. But when it comes to design thinking, what are some of the thinking wrong processes, or what are some of the foundational skills that we need to kind of integrate into our design process now to start making a difference?
Yeah, so I can unpack the thinking wrong approach. So thinking wrong was created by a colleague of mine, John Bielenberg. I've known him since 2009. We do a lot of work together. And really what thinking wrong is that it encourages people to break their synaptic connections, to invite randomness and serendipity into the creative process to come up with truly unique and innovative ideas. what tends to happen is that when, as a designer, we're presented with a problem, design challenge, we go through our filing cabinet of best practices, things that we've seen in the past, things that we know work, and then we just apply that to this new challenge, not really knowing that we're doing it, but we tend to just kind of repeat some of the same processes, some of the same approaches, the same solutions. What thinking wrong does is that it allows you to kind of sever that and trick the brain to come up with more unique, innovative ideas. And I think that is probably one of the best approaches when it comes to taking climate action, because these best practices that I talked about got us into this mess in the first place. And so we definitely need a new way of thinking to address some of these challenges that human beings have never addressed before. We can't use the same way of thinking that got us into this mess if we expect to get out of it. So the think wrong stuff, there's a few other kind of approaches and processes out there that really help people break out of their status quo vision of the world and really encourages them to ask better questions, to push them out of their comfort zone. I think that's going to be key in terms of how we address some of these big challenges, because if we expect to just apply the same old thinking to these new challenges, we're going to get the same expected results. And I think putting more emphasis on, you mentioned this too, user research. We have to understand who we're designing with in mind. And as designers, one of the talking points I share a lot in my talks, especially with my students, is 4 simple words: design with, not for. And I learned that early on as a design professional when I was focused on social impact. We have to understand the people that we're designing in mind, whether that's, living among them, whether that's talking to them, whether that's, some sort of survey, whatever you can do to really understand the challenges that some of these people are facing or some of the goals that they're trying to achieve. It's really important for a designer to have that in mind when making various design decisions. So I think that's another key component there. One other thing in terms of just this approach to these big problems, I think collaboration is something that we hear a lot about, but the way that I see collaboration when it comes to addressing our climate crisis is that this is a all hands on deck problem, right? So we need to really work with so many different types of people, truly collaborate in terms of exchanging information, resources, experience, failures, successes. We can't do this alone. And you've probably heard the phrase, it's not going to take a magic silver bullet. It's going to take a silver buckshot. So every industry, top down, bottom up, no matter if you're a senior level executive, C-suite, individual at a large company, or you're an intern or a junior designer, your ideas and experience and wisdom is valuable. And so to the designers out there, collaborate with the engineers, the manufacturers, the researchers, to ensure sustainable considerations are integrated throughout the process, so that your knowledge of sustainable design and your background and your knowledge of just the people that you're designing in mind are aligned with other folks on the team, so that you all can truly create the best solution possible.
Really appreciate that. That is actually the goal of this podcast series, is to emphasize the importance of collaboration and having all of those teams on the same page, because that's really, you have so many diverse perspectives, you have so many different takes, you can kind of build such a well-oiled machine if everyone understands the initiative and has a say in it. And it's statistically proven that when teams work together and there are, a range of diverse perspectives, that the result is much more impactful. So without giving away too much of the secret sauce involved in your workshops, can you kind of take us through the most meaningful points that you try to drive home when you put on a workshop or when you give a keynote speech, or some of the most important points that you think would make a difference in our design journeys right now? And beyond that, I would love to hear maybe some of your favorite examples, some of your favorite personal projects, or some businesses and practices that you really appreciate and the actual impact that they're making. Because as designers, as creatives, the result that we create is very important to us. So having an example of the change and the impact that we can have, nationally, globally, or even right here at home is really important. So what have been some of the most meaningful parts of your journey or points of impact that you've created?
Yeah. So I'll address the first one, the first part of that question. You mentioned this, and we talked about this in our intro call a few weeks ago. One of the phrases I also talk about in a lot of my presentations is that we can't do business on a dead planet. And it might sound harsh or maybe awkward at first, but it's true, right? Like, will the people that engage with your product, your service, your experience, will they care about your company if they see a wildfire approaching their home, or when they're starting to see water coming into their doors because of a Category 5 hurricane? Like, businesses rely on people to engage with their product, service, or experience. I try not to use the word consumer or customer in my language, so that's why I say it that way. So with that in mind, for me, it would make sense that businesses would, if they want to be around, if they expect to be around for a lot longer than they are today, then it would behoove them to want to, get their shit together and actually want to take climate action in some form or another. So how are those businesses showing up and taking climate action? I think that's a great question. For those who might be interviewing companies for your first job or your next job, ask them in that interview process, do your research, right? See if they've practiced any sort of greenwashing methods or any sort of campaigns. Because, if you are wanting as a personal desire to take climate action in the work that you do, you need to make sure that your company is aligned with that as well. I think another talking point that I share often is that, designers, we have an amazing set of skills that dovetails nicely with addressing our climate breakdown. We use creativity to solve complex problems. We have the ability to visualize those complex problems. We can communicate really important messages. We can design interactions that encourage others to take action. So for me, and I'm biased, of course, because this is my world, but I just feel like we can play such a great supporting cast member to those on the front lines, the scientists, the researchers, the policymakers, the community activists. So why not lend our skills? It just makes sense, right? Another point is that it doesn't have to be this way. And what I mean by that is that everything in life has been made up, has been invented by one or multiple people at some point. But with that, these systems have been created with bias, with motives, with those people's own history and experience and perspective, that we're living in someone else's world, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so I think with the time that we're living in now, with us seeing this climate breakdown in real life is not a future thing, it's a today thing. How can we create these new systems and approaches that really upgrade how we live in today's world? And how can we create those systems that will benefit future generations to come? How can we create those systems that can heal and re-nourish the planet, re-nourish the damage that we've caused? So, I think for me, design just plays a huge role in all of this. We work with businesses. So if we expect to do anything professionally, then let's work with businesses or create our own businesses as designers. I think designers who have a sense of business, they have that business acumen in their toolkit. I think you're a super hero, because you have both your creative skills and your business skills. You match those up together. Now we're talking. But if you're not wanting to take that entrepreneurial endeavor and want to just work for companies, then really expose them to what's possible. Show them these processes, these methodologies, these frameworks. Show them other companies that are doing something similar that they can replicate or be inspired by. But yeah, I feel like we as designers can play a huge role, and I'm excited to create. And then maybe this is a segue into the last part of your question. I'm excited to co-create climatedesigners.org with a team of amazing folks over the last 4 years. And shameless plug, but I'm going to use that as my example. So, as I mentioned in my intro, it's a global community. We have members all over the world. We have chapters and hubs. We have 2 podcasts. We have a resource library. We create educational content. We support our designers in various ways. And we're just getting started. We have big visions for the future of climate designers. The examples that I can share with you would be the examples that I hear when we have virtual events, or when I run into someone on the street, or when I get an email in my inbox saying how valuable the organization was, the community was to that person, whether that was them finding their first quote unquote climate design job, whether it was them finding a business partner to start a business project, whether it was them just owning the title of a climate designer. It was really cool early on to hear that someone in their cover letter to their very first climate focused company, that they actually put "I'm a climate designer" in their cover letter. That was awesome, right? And so for me, titles are invented, right? We invent titles for jobs all the time. The title of a UX UI designer didn't exist 15 years ago. Graphic designer didn't exist 50 plus years ago. So why not invent new titles, and titles that really put values up front and center? The idea of a climate designer, it's not the sexiest, coolest title, I'll be honest, but it does the job. It clearly states where that person is putting their focus. And so you can be a climate designer in fashion. You could be a climate designer in packaging. You could be a climate designer in product. So introducing yourself as a climate designer puts your values on your sleeve so that people know what you represent and where you want to put your energy. Still doing the creative work that you're doing, but having that level of knowledge of, again, going back to understanding the why and the how, understanding various frameworks, understanding the better questions to ask during the design process. So yeah, I mean, I think, shameless plug, but I just really feel like the work that we're doing has had and will continue to have a lot of impact in the design industry. I mean, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to redesign the design industry, to put climate at the core of every single creative person's work, so that the conversations that you're having with your guests, with the videos that we're watching, with the frameworks that we're learning, they're all just by default, so that there doesn't have to be potentially a thing called a climate designer or even a sustainable designer. Like, it's just default. This is just how we design moving forward, because it just makes sense. Yeah. So that is our big, hairy, audacious goal. We're just at the very beginning of the organization. We have a lot of work to do, but I just figured I'd share that little point there as well.
Yeah, with a mission as good as yours, shameless plug all day, we're here for it. So just to reiterate, from all levels of perspective, if you are running a business, integrate sustainability, start exploring regenerative business models. If you are a freelancer, establish a point of difference before the climate, integrate that into your positioning, into your messaging. It will help you stand out, and it will help you eliminate and attract, the wrong and right clients. If you are someone that wants to work for a design agency or for a business, ask for transparency, ask for them to be honest with you, know what's going on at where you work, and make sure it's a happy place for you, and look for opportunities to integrate even more sustainable practices into that. Before we move further, I think that we've not really taken time to define a lot of the verbiage that we hear in the sustainable and regenerative fields. So can we go back and maybe cover a few terms like greenwashing, and maybe 2 or 3 other positive and negative terms that we can use to identify potential threats or potential opportunities as we start moving into the sustainable fields?
Sure. Yeah. I'll kind of riff off the top of my head. So greenwashing. Yeah. We probably have seen it before we even knew what it was. And there are attempts by companies to present themselves as doing something good for the planet, right? Whether it's, reusing all the materials, or, coming at it from, producing their product from an ethical source or whatever. Like, they create this kind of image of themselves doing something. But if you peel back the layers, if you crunch the numbers, if you look into the reports, if you just talk to people that are actually in those supply chains or, within those companies, you might discover that they're actually just BSing you. And so it's a thing that is unfortunately just part of business. And businesses are doing this on purpose because they know, especially the younger generation, who are willing to spend extra money to buy a product, to use a service from a company that they believe is aligned with their values and is doing good. They're willing to kind of try to get those dollars because they know that they can. But the downside of that is that this younger generation, they know how to call people out. They know how to put a company on the spotlight and call them out on greenwashing. And I don't know, man, it doesn't seem like a very good business tactic today because of all the transparency, all the watchdog organizations, all the ways that people can find information about your company. I would hope to see, just from a personal perspective, but I'm hoping also from a business perspective, from those companies, from the top down, that greenwashing goes away, because I don't think you can hide anymore. I don't think you can kind of present yourself in a certain way without being called out on it. Another thing that I always be mindful of another phrase that I'm mindful of using is climate breakdown or climate emergency.
Okay.
I think climate change, that word has become so numb that even the word change in some ways isn't a bad thing, right? Like, who wouldn't want maybe warmer winters? Who wouldn't want a different, maybe, way of living, depending on where they are? But I feel like the phrase climate breakdown, climate emergency really turns up the urgency of things, and it speaks more true, right? Our climate is breaking down. Our natural systems are out of balance. And that's why we're seeing all these storms and droughts and other natural disasters happening because of that. I mean, look what happened in Texas just a few days ago here in the US, right? Like, so I think climate breakdown is something that is more direct and to the point. Climate emergency, same thing. There's a sense of urgency behind that. And then, as I quickly mentioned, I don't use the words consumer or customer. I try not to, at least, because at the end of the day, we're human beings. We have feelings, we have families, we have desires, we have hopes and dreams, and all the things, right? And for me to hear companies just see us as these zombies who just go to work, come home, veg out, sleep, and repeat and repeat and repeat. And then on the weekends, we buy shit just to kind of keep our happiness to a certain level, or that we think is our happiness at a certain level. For me, it belittles people. It just never sat well with me. And so I try to use very particular language around that, even with my students, because I don't want them to just see the people on the other end of their product, their service, their experience as just people to pay for their thing so that they can get paid at the end of the day. Like, we're dealing with people's lives here, and as designers, we just need to, again, going back to our impact, understand the stuff that we're putting out into the world, how that really does impact people's lives on a day-to-day basis.
It does. And so I just kind of want to ask point blank, what do you think the biggest disconnect is? Because when I look at the climate change conversation, I feel like we live in a world of instant gratification. If you can't see its damage, if it's not right in front of you, it doesn't matter how loud someone is shouting at you. You might not be concerned. The opposite side of that is the example that you just gave. Like, what if, things get worse and you have to make a change, but it's because, there's a fire at your door. There's, flooding happening incessantly. There's 100-mile-per-hour winds that are nonstop, like in Texas a little while ago. So for designers, for communication specialists, for people that are in charge of the audience facing experiences, what are the most important bridges to gap, or what are the most human approaches that really drive home the importance of the climate emergency that we're facing?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two ways. There's this is a good question. I believe, in my opinion, that our climate emergency is a symptom to something deeper. I think it is the fact that we've lost our connection to each other and our natural world. And we can peel back all of that and talk about capitalism and talk about colonialism and all of that. And I don't think we have time for that, maybe a separate conversation. But, I think the moment that we started to move away from that, and more often than not because we wanted to, but by force, um, we started to show up to the world in a very different way. We started to see nature as a resource for us, for ourselves, as opposed to a part of us, and we are part of that. And so for me, I've just always thought that this is a crisis of identity. We've lost our way as a species. And so on one hand, yes, the climate tech startups and the EVs and the Elon Musks of the world, there needs to be part of that, sure, but I don't believe that we can solely rely on technological solutions as a way to get us out of this mess. I think we really need to, at the same time, in the same conversation, address some of the deeper, more personal issues that we unfortunately have been dealing with over the last couple centuries. So I think there's a lot of inner work that needs to be done. And the second way of answering your question, going to that outer work, is that, as we all know, here in the US and many places around the world, our climate emergency has become so politicized that we can't really get anywhere with anything, let alone a conversation with someone who might not see this in the same way as you. So I'm wondering, how can we address our climate breakdown in a way without even addressing what it is? So can we focus on the benefits? Can we focus on the positive outcome, the positive world that we would be co-designing if everything, actually happened? Who would be against that? Who would be against the cleaner water, cleaner air, more jobs, more crops, all these innovations that we know exist, but they just need to be fully embraced and invested in. There's a ton out there that is already happening and can continue to happen. We just need to know that it's out there, and we need to know how we can contribute to helping those organizations, those projects succeed. But how do we do that where we don't cut off half the population because we use a certain phrase that is politicized? I think we need everyone. Again, this goes back to the top down, bottom up, all hands on deck approach. Like, we need those who might not see us eye to eye politically, but we still need their wisdom. We still need their experience. We still need their history, because they could be sitting on something that can unlock new technologies, new approaches, new innovation, new conversations. So yeah, I think it's how do we focus on the benefits and the positive outcomes of all this? Because yeah, we don't have time to continue the argument. We don't have time. The whole climate denial thing, we don't have time. Like, if you don't believe it, then get on the sidelines to make room for people who actually do and actually want to get shit done. So, but how do we do it so that we can invite more of those folks off the sidelines if they're willing to have those conversations? And possibly one way of doing that is to show them what's possible. There's a whole thing. I don't know if you know the whole solar punk idea or the solar punk perspective, but yeah, I think going back to another phrase that should be in these conversations from your previous question, I think solar punk. If those who are listening or watching right now don't know it, just Google solar punk, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a way of visualizing and illustrating what the world can look like if we got our shit together, if we rebalance Earth's living systems, if we scale the solutions that we needed to scale, if we put every living species at the center of every decision that we make. It's the opposite of the Mad Max world, right?
Yeah.
And so it started out in literature back in the teens, I believe, and then art, music, design, movies started to really embrace that. It's just a much more hopeful, but based in reality approach to helping people see what's possible. Because I feel like if we only talk about the no more of this, no more of that, so stop driving, no more flying, no more eating meat, which are things that we need to consider if we're in a privileged enough situation to do that. But there needs to be a part two of that conversation. And I believe that part two is the idea of that solar punk, visualizing what world we can live in, not the one that we want to avoid. We can show people what's possible, and we can show them a path for them to take so that they can contribute and be a part of that world.
And so I want to dive into that. I know that we've not got that much time left. We'll take like maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll jump into the audience questions because they're rolling in. But along the lines of showing people what is possible, you and Brian recommended the documentary 2040 on YouTube. It's available. You can watch it with ads. You can spend $3 to rent it. It is an amazing watch. It blends amazing visual storytelling in with the story of our climate emergency, but from a positive perspective, not the detriment that we'll see if we don't take action, but the possible beautiful future that we can build. Removing the conflict between people, because that will always exist. It's always going to have to be something that is addressed. Some of the methods that were shown on there, like decentralized electricity, better education, more sustainable practices that are within the power of the people, which is where real change begins. So can you talk to us a little bit about that documentary, about the possibility of things that lie ahead of us, some of the opportunities that might exist for designers as these new technologies and methods evolve, and how quickly things can change with technology that exists today? For those of you who haven't seen it, the main focus in that documentary is that it studied technology as it exists today if it was put into application. So this isn't far-fetched. We have these tools right now. So I'll let you take it away, and for the next few minutes, let's discuss that, and then we'll get our audience in here to talk to you.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I like this documentary, I show it every semester to my students. I teach a class called Climate Designers. So we watch it, and there is a homework assignment. They have to basically visualize their path from today to 2040 as a designer taking climate action. The reason why I like the documentary is the year itself, 2040. It's 16 years away.
Yeah.
And so the way that I look at it is that it's far enough that a lot can happen, but not too far into the future that we can't see ourselves in it.
Yeah.
And so I believe that with the focus on 5 project drawdown solutions, and he could have picked any 5, he just picked those 5. He highlights the fact that a lot can happen within the 16 or so years that we have to reach 2040, that you, the viewer of the documentary, can be a part of. And so there is an element of action and get off the couch and do something, because those technologies and solutions exist today, natural and technological. So what's preventing those from really scaling and really being implemented? Another part of the documentary I really enjoy is that solar punk storytelling, right? So for those who haven't seen it, when he does these deep dives into these 5 solution spaces, he then fast forwards the documentary. He hires an actress to play his daughter. His daughter today is maybe 6 or 7 or so. And then he hires an actress to play her as a young adult in the year 2040. And after each deep dive, he fast forwards and shows what her world will look like if those solutions were implemented. And not just those solutions, but the ripple effects of those solutions. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we also don't think about too, is like, what are the ripple effects of EV or of solar or of mushrooms and kelp? Like not solely focus on the thing itself, but the second, third, fourth ripple down the road that will create amazing benefits to people and planet. And I think that documentary allows the viewer to really see it that way. So yeah, I think it's just a really interesting thought exercise. Again, it's 16 years out, a lot can happen. As designers, we can see that world in the year 2040 through the documentary, whether it's ads, touch screens, the product design, actually, there's a lot of that in there, industrial design in there in the year 2040. So as designers, how can we put our creative hats on while viewing the documentary and go, oh, okay, I didn't know that is where this thing might go. The thing that I'm working on today could lead into that innovation, or, could address that part of society. I didn't know that. So again, it allows us to kind of imagine that world. And I think the other big point in that documentary that I also talk a lot about in my presentations is the imagination gap. And so going off of the solar punk stuff, the 2040 stuff that we've been talking about, we have an imagination gap. Again, people don't know what's possible unless they actually see it.
Yeah.
And we need to help them see it. And documentaries like 2040, the solar punk stuff, allows people to see it so that we can fill that imagination gap so that they can actually move and actually get to work. So again, as designers, as visual makers, products, services, experiences, how can we show people what's possible so that they can understand and actually take action?
Yeah. And I love that it explored so many different facets that contribute to sustainability. So like as a creative, you're going to want to watch this, whether you're interested in building educational platforms or building products or building communities, because all of those play a role in the collective good and building a more sustainable world. So we'll make sure that we've got links to the documentary everywhere that this episode gets posted, just for easy reference. But yeah, definitely highly, highly recommend. So Marc, before we start taking the audience questions, we always love to give our guests an opportunity to express their top 3 influences, top 3 role models, the people that have influenced their journey the most, or the experiences. So if you would like to give a shameless shout out or say a thanks to the people that have inspired you along the way, let's do that. And then we'll actually get started with our question session.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd be anywhere today if it wasn't for, if you want to be specific, if it wasn't for Ricky Miller in 7th grade history class. He forgot his lunch money, and we were sitting alphabetical at the time, and he was the coolest kid in middle school, and I was right behind him. And he turned around and said, "Hey, I'll give you this mixtape for your lunch money." And I knew anything that Ricky liked, I should like, because he was the coolest kid in middle school. And so I had no idea what was on the mixtape. He just said it was some sort of thing called punk. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went home that day, played it, and it was amazing. And, that really got me into this idea of punk rock, and not just the music, but just the ethos behind it. Right. And so I've been listening to punk rock for, 30 years now. And, it drives me.
Yeah.
It shapes my life and work. I fight for causes I care about. I do question authority and these existing systems. I embrace the DIY mindset. The idea that I can create a website and a logo and get a project off the ground in a day, in a few hours. That's amazing. I mean, that is the DIY mindset in a nutshell. And so I look back on my work and I just feel like this whole punk rock ethos thing has just driven everything that I've done and will continue to. And I still listen to the genre. My favorite bands are still, they're in their 50s and 60s and they're still playing amazing music. So I think, with that, that whole genre, that whole ethos has driven me to the work that I'm doing now. I mentioned John Bielenberg. He's been a close friend and colleague of mine, the whole creator of Think Wrong. We still do projects together. He's always just still exposing me to new ways of thinking. I have so many other mentors and colleagues I won't go through all of them, so I'm not going to pretend to list out everyone because I might forget a few and piss people off. But, I strive to find people that I can collaborate with that'll push me and allow me to be myself and to welcome my crazy ideas while at the same time I can learn from them. And finding your creative soulmate is super amazing. My partner Rachel, she's awesome. We talk about capitalism and design and all these big heady things all the time. My buddy Ben, who is in Detroit, we've done a number of projects together. So when you find your people, like really nurture those relationships. So anyway, I'm digressing from your original prompt, but I just wanted to underscore that again, we can't do this alone. And so when you find people that you connect with and they connect with you and you can learn so much from them and you can be your authentic self, I think that'll make for a more collaborative, fun experience working on these big, gnarly challenges. I mean, this topic is pretty heavy, y'all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we're talking about the future of humans. So, I think we need to have some form of play and fun in it. Um, I'll mention a few resources actually that kind of speak to that. Um, uh, there's an amazing YouTube channel called Climate Town with Raleigh Williams. Highly recommend it. He's kind of like the John Oliver for climate. He's young, he's funny, he's a comedian. He does these deep dives into various topics around climate. He's blowing up. He's getting a lot of attention now, which is good. But the reason why I bring him up specifically is that he injects fun and comedy into it, because I feel like there's so much of this doom talk out there that we only focus on that. And I actually have another talking point in my talks that I share often around the idea of doom and gloom, right? Where, the doom and gloom talk is negative and dangerous, in my opinion. It doesn't excite people. It doesn't get anyone out of bed. And it, I believe, inhibits people from actually wanting to do this work. Doom and gloom is something that still acknowledges this uncertain future. It still acknowledges what we're going to walk into, but it encourages folks to use that energy to seek out the solutions that are already being created and being developed, like the Project Drawdown solutions, so that they can use that as motivation to actually take climate action. I mean, there's no surprise that our friendly organization, workonclimate.org, they're growing. They have like 20, 30,000 members. Like, they're helping people transition to climate, because people are realizing that, what is the point of all this if we don't have a thriving planet to live on? I want to do something with my skills, whether you're an electrician, an engineer, a designer, a chef, a mechanic, a musician, doesn't matter. And so it's no surprise that Work on Climate, who we're very friendly with, they're growing crazy, right? Because they are realizing that people want to do this kind of work. But at the same time, we need to understand that this work is mentally and emotionally hard. And so how can we inject fun and play into this? Because if not, then we're all going to get burnt out. And then if we all get burnt out, then who's actually going to step up to the plate?
Well, that actually is the perfect segue into the questions that the audience are asking. So I'll go ahead and ask you directly. We've got kind of a two questions that work very well with each other from Brian and Jacqueline. So I'll ask them kind of collectively. How do we as designers rebrand climate change is the question from Brian. And Jacqueline kind of follows up with saying that she's been part of conversations with designers and marketers that are focusing on how to address climate change without addressing it. And they focus on why the product or idea is better instead of putting the sustainability factor first. I know that's something that we've kind of opened up a discussion about, and there needs to be a balance and awareness, but basically, how do we make the climate emergency something that we can, kind of make sexy, kind of make enjoyable, take that doom vision, and while it's still relevant, focus on the benefits or the potential impact or the things that really make us happy and are easier to motivate us.
Yeah, I don't think there's one right way of doing it. I think there's many different right ways of doing it. I feel like there's depending on the industry, depending on the organization, the company, the project, if you need to lead with climate, if you need to lead with sustainability, okay. If it makes sense for you and the people that you're addressing or supporting or engaging with, great. But if it doesn't really matter, not that it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter in general, but just if you don't need to lead with it, then don't. There's plenty of companies out there right now that are not really taking a climate stance at the kind of the that first touch point. Like, you would see them and go, oh, this isn't a climate company, but then you kind of peel back the curtains and you realize that they are actually doing a lot. You're like, oh, interesting. So I think it just depends. How do you rebrand climate change? I mean, I think, again, can we address this in a more specific phrase like climate breakdown or climate emergency, or flip it around and be more positive? Maybe it's not climate change, maybe it is climate action. That action word evokes movement and change and progress. And so who would want to, not be a part of something? And this goes where this is where the solar punk stuff goes, where you show people what's possible so that they can see that future that they can strive towards if they get off the couch and actually do something. So maybe that's how we rebrand it. Maybe it is focused all on the positive and the benefits, and we don't even maybe say that C word. I don't think we really even have to.
And like you said, the power of community, of networking and coming together. People have such a beautiful way of personalizing the most random of things. So, the more aware you are of what exists in the world of sustainability and regenerative practices, the more leverage you have to create something that's personal, unique, innovative, and kind of approach it from your own way. And check the chat really quick. If you all have any other questions for Marc, please drop them in the chat. While our audience is taking a second, I would love to invite them to unmute and turn videos on in just a second. But before that, I would love to just kind of have a sign off of the recorded session of the podcast. And before we do that, I would love for you to let everyone know where they can find you. You've mentioned Climate Town, a few other organizations to look to. Can you just kind of give us a rundown on things that we could do, join, see today that would, start us on our journey or lend some support or help us to start to establish a network? Your personal platforms first, so we know how to keep up with you on LinkedIn, all of the projects that you have going on, and then just some really valuable outlets that you recommend.
Yeah, I'll do a rapid fire. I have a lot here, so get your pen and paper ready.
Bring it on.
So first and foremost, you can find me online at marcobrien.net, marcobrien.net. Yes, still rocking the .net. I've had that since 2001, I believe.
Nice.
So, and then you can do the whole LinkedIn, whatever thing there. I mentioned climatedesigners.org. I'm biased, of course, but I really do believe in the work that we're doing. We've been a little quiet over the last few months, only because we've been doing a lot of back-end admin work to try to set us up for even more programs and chapters in the future. So be on the lookout, climatedesigners.org. Follow us on social, do the whole sign up for the newsletter thing. There are some really great organizations, as I mentioned. Work on Climate is a friend of ours. Clean Creatives is another amazing organization that is for designers and creatives, much more focused on advertising. And then climatebase.org and Terra.do are two organizations that we're also very friendly with. For those who are wanting to dive deeper into the why and the how, they offer fellowships.
Okay.
YouTube University, plenty of great stuff out there. Climate Town being one of them. There's an amazing channel called Our Changing Climate.
Okay.
And I love how the guy writes and how he puts his videos together. And he's coming at it from a more progressive perspective. I think if you even just look at the thumbnails, you'll see what I'm saying.
Okay.
But I think what he says is very on the nose and direct and to the point. Another series on YouTube is called The Breakdown by Earthrise Studio. They have 2 seasons out there. I recommend watching it. It's a great primer for you to get a sense of how we got into this mess. Each episode is about 8-9 minutes, and each episode focuses on a different topic. But highly recommend them. I mean, lots of stuff on YouTube. I can probably put together a list there. I mean, another thing that I watch is just commercials and just business videos, only because I want to know how these advertising companies, I want to know how these companies, businesses are actually promoting their product that's doing harm. What can we learn from them? How can we steal their approach to take back and to put it in our climate work? I watch a lot of CNBC and Bloomberg videos, not because I'm all about, all these companies, but again, I just want to learn how they're doing it. What were some of their successes and challenges, and then how are they promoting themselves? And again, how do we take that back and apply it to climate focused work? Podcasts. Oh man. Upstream is one of my favorite podcasts.
Okay.
EcoCiv podcast, Climate One, Raleigh Williams, who does Climate Town. He has a podcast called the Climate Deniers Playbook. Planet Critical is another one. So a lot of these podcasts and YouTube channels are much more on the progressive side. That's kind of where I lean anyway. So, I just want to see how other people are talking about these topics. And then, as I mentioned, Climify is one of Climate Designers podcasts. We also have our own podcast that we are wanting to revamp and dust off. So we're actually going to be calling it Doom and Bloom.
Okay.
And I have a team working with me on putting that podcast together. So we should be putting new episodes out over the next few months. So definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, I mean, if any of you are working at a design studio, I do contract out with design studios to help them level up their climate work with their clients. I also have my own clients. But yeah, you can learn all about that at marcobrien.net.
Marc, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible insights on sustainable and regenerative design, the superpowers that we possess as creatives. Your expertise and passion for making a positive impact in the world are truly inspiring. To our listeners, remember that all the links, the resources, the recommendations, everything that Marc talked about today can be found in the episode description. Be sure to check them out. Dive deeper into the amazing work that Marc and his network is doing. Make sure that you connect with him on LinkedIn and follow his journey. As we wrap up, let's just remember that every small action we take can lead to significant change, and that creating a brighter future, a more beautiful world is not as out of reach as it might seem to be, especially if we work together. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Until next time, let's keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Stay motivated, stay inspired. Most importantly, stay connected. And let's make the world a better place, one design at a time. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Developing Life podcast series. In our next episode, we will be welcoming Dr. Yuona Thiessen for a discussion on AI chatbots and the possibilities that lie ahead in integrating them into our business practices.